taking a chance. Telling me to dance, taking a chance. Telling me to dance, taking a chance.
Hey, Fearless. Welcome to another Tactical Tuesday. I am lucky enough to be sitting outside in 30-some degree weather. It's beautiful. So welcome. We have, as you guys know, we have an awesome guest for tonight. So it's an exclusive to Fearless, someone that is coming in to explain to us, the group that focuses on being good humans, how we can do that even more. While keeping our businesses profitable, but focusing on those that need our help the very most. And I know that's a lot of everyone's whys. So I'm really excited to hear Sandie Price from CMHC. Come on. So bumping music for sure. You were first, Ryan. Awesome. All right. Yep. Let's go CMHC. So say hi as you jump on, guys. If you say where you're from too, that will help Sandie get a feel for the, cross-country feel that we certainly do have. So St. Paul, Alberta, St. Alberta, so mostly Alberta so far, Spruce Grove, Florida, right, Carissa, Cape Breton, New Brunswick. Awesome. Okay, guys. So Oshawa, perfect, our first Ontario. Hey, Greg. So, as this group knows, our focus is, of course, as investors, we need to make money. We need to learn how to do this, profitably. But in this group, we focus and always have on also being good humans. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how can we expand that good human portion? So, dealing with sectors of the population that need housing and that are underhoused, dealing with people that are different groups that are needing more and more help. And we're going to break down all of what that means. And the beautiful part is that CMHC has that as mandates, in that they want to be able to bring affordable housing, sustainable housing, green housing, which I know is also important to many of you, to the Canadian economy. So we're all on the same path. We all have the same goal. So, perfect. Balmy Ottawa. Oh, ouch. Yikes. Cape Breton, Vancouver. Awesome. Return on investment is beyond profits, right? For sure. Cindy, Whitecourt. Awesome. Red Deer. Pickering. Sydney, BC. Awesome. Calgary. Okay, Montreal. There we go. Adele. Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. Perfect, guys. Awesome. So lots of spread across the country, as we can see. So we will, I'm just going to bring Sandie on right now, guys, and we are going to hit this topic tonight. So this is a two-part series, guys. 2 parts to it. Tonight, we're going to go through what is affordability, what is sustainability, what does this stuff look like, okay? Not only from our perspective, but if we can understand it from CMHC's perspective, then we can fit within their programs, right? So we have to first seek to understand and then be understood. So tonight is all about understanding. Next week is going to be about the programs then that fit. So once we understand their mandates and what they need and what they're pushing for, then next week we're going to talk about, great, and this is how they're supporting those and where can we jump in on that and make a difference. So I'm going to add Sandie to the stream. Hey.
Got to unmute. I was saying Tactical Tuesday. I was promised tacos, I thought, for Tuesday. But
Taco Tuesday, yeah. I should be doing that, actually, especially down here in this hot weather.
I know. That doesn't seem fair.
So welcome, Sandie.
Welcome. I'm joining you from Edmonton. So it's not sunny and balmy here. It's been really windy here today. I saw there's a few others on the comments that checked in from here, and yeah, it's been kind of a strange day. So
yeah,
thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, super excited. We've talked so much about this over the last few weeks, and it's finally here. So super awesome. Lisa, she's asking, is this going to be recorded? So I'll just kind of address that real quick. So yes, Lisa, it is recorded, and it will be available here on replay right just as a live in the stream all week long. And actually, we'll probably leave this one on for a couple of weeks. So yeah, totally accessible to re-listen to. And on that note, if anyone is listening to the replays, please just type that in. Just let us know so that we know who's coming in on the replays. That's always super helpful for us. So, all right, from Surrey, BC. Hey, Nicolette. You're welcome, Lisa. Okay, so let's get to it. Sandie, we know that CMHC has some pretty big goals, some pretty lofty goals. One of them, we'll get to it. We'll talk about them. But why should we, as small investors who are just trying to make it work ourselves, small landlords, why should we care about the same things that CMHC does?
Well, because we're kind of all in this together. Like, we talk about these big lofty goals that we have. Like, we sometimes call them like those big, hairy, audacious goals. Like, we literally call them that here behind the scenes. And one of those is that by 2030, everyone in Canada has a home that meets their needs and that they can afford. And so, we can't achieve that on our own. We know that we need all sorts of investment in the housing sector in order for that goal to become a reality. And so we partner through the National Housing Strategy and through some of our other programs. We partner with all sectors of Canadian, people living in Canada, to help us achieve that. And it's interesting because I think you bring to mind that this isn't a conversation we typically have. This is new. We're used to doing just presentations. I work on a team called Outreach and Project Development, and part of our goal is to kind of bring new investments to the sector and to entice people. But one of the conversations we have is that we don't typically talk to like smaller. I don't want to say small real estate investors. We tend to focus a lot on the public sector and the nonprofit sector, and I don't know. I find this to be a really interesting conversation. So that is the primary reason, because we're all in this together. Because if COVID unpacked anything, it showed how precarious housing can be for some folks. And so I think that if we all just as humans, and that be a good human line that you keep bringing out, it is something that we choose to bring through our work and through our businesses, then I think that we can ensure that those things are a reality together. So
it's really cool too, because I've told you before, and as you guys know, all that are watching, there's all these years CMHC has very, very much been something that, we know that there's programs, we know that there's different things, but it all seems beyond us, and it seems unreachable. And yet you're saying, hey, no, listen, there is a lot that you guys can be doing and that we can be doing to help each other. And we all want sustainable housing. We all, want affordable housing. We all want to help those, segments of the population that need that hand up. It's part, when we talk about our whys and why we're even doing this, so many people have those things in their why, but we all feel that we're not there yet. We can't do it yet. And you're saying you can.
Well, because it seems pretty scary. Like, when I use the term affordable housing to, especially people who are, like for profit, right? Honestly, you think, well, that's not the sector that we're going to play in. And honestly, like all housing, like all the projects, whether they be with nonprofits or government entities, they need to be financially viable. And so it's pretty rare nowadays that you will see 100% publicly funded housing like we used to see. It's really for a very specific segment of the population, and it's not the bulk of the work that we do. So we need those projects to be viable financially. So we're talking about people making profits, whether it be if it's a nonprofit, then they can reinvest those dollars back into the sector, because they're nonprofits. A lot of governments, especially in my home province of Alberta, our municipalities aren't really legally allowed to hold debt in the same sort of way. And so, they can't take a loss leader and say, well, we're just going to dump a bunch of money into it. So I think when we're talking about housing and the financial, like being able to make a profit and to be financially feasible is something that it's those conversations that we should be having. But I absolutely agree with you. In the 2.5 years I've been with CMHC, like I have done very little outreach with the private sector. I mean, we have a whole team that works with those large scale REITs, the big companies that get, the big guys, but they don't interact in the same way. And they're starting to actually buy into what we call the National Housing Strategy, which we'll unpack a lot more, I think, next time. But to hear in that conversation with you that you didn't even really know what that meant was really interesting to me. But I do think it seems, again, something that is just overwhelming. So I think one of the goals we had today was to, really, let's unpack what is affordable housing.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a few graphics I know that I threw in there. I don't know if this is time for one, but
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Like, so I thought like, what are we talking about when we say affordable housing? So you want to throw up that graphic, so when we're thinking about the definitions, it can be public, it can be nonprofit, it could be private housing, it could be all sorts of different things. It could be built with or without government support. It includes rental and ownership models. We're not just talking about, deep subsidized rent, but overall, we want to talk about housing where housing doesn't cost in excess of 30% of a household's income. Yeah. Because anytime we're talking about housing that costs in excess of 30% of a household's income, and those are just some of the numbers that I just talked about there, we're at risk of being in core housing need. And so, 1.7 million Canadian households are in identifiable core housing need. And so maybe we need to think about that. I was like trying to unpack that as I was in the shower this morning. I was thinking about, well, how do I define that to a group like yourself? And I was thinking about, when we think about core housing need and housing insecurity, maybe we're used to thinking about the individuals that are chronically houseless or perhaps living in those encampments in our communities that we don't know what to do with. And, that certainly is a portion of people who are in core housing need. But by and large, the vast majority of Canadian households that are in that need are actually, they're that single mom with 3 jobs trying to keep a roof over her kid's head and having to make those tough decisions about, like, do I, keep the lights on or do I feed myself today? Right? Like, that's core housing need. It's it's the newcomers trying to make ends meet in a culture that they've never understood before. So we have this kind of defined way of talking about core housing need, and it's going to vary from region to region. So what $75,000 in household income buys in Saskatoon or Regina is going to be vastly different than the housing market in Vancouver or Toronto or even in St. John's, right? So we want to make sure that we're talking about that. So affordability is the number one criteria when we talk about core housing need. But I heard you say earlier, and I wanted to pick up on it, where you said about people being underhoused. So core housing need can actually apply to both being underhoused and overhoused. So that's really cool because people don't, well, it's not cool, but it's not something we think about. But especially in small communities, this is where I see it like a huge, huge kind of market for groups like yours to get invested into is those smaller market communities and municipalities, because that's where people tend to be overhoused. You have workers like singles living in 3-bedroom homes because that's all that's available. There aren't any of those like 1-bedroom units. So underhoused and overhoused is always part of it. And then obviously, things like adequate, so that it's not, in disrepair and things like that. So those are kind of how we define what is core housing need for that 1.7 million, almost 2 million Canadians.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. It's a lot.
It's a lot of people.
So what's really interesting to me is like when you guys are defining what's affordable housing, that's basically 30% or less of a household's income is going toward their housing. And we know as investors that that's, you know, a parameter that we use when we're looking to see if someone
okay.
can afford our place. We know that already is a third of their income. And yet here you guys have the same mandate, and we know how difficult that is to find because we're dealing with these people on a very regular basis. So I love that we have the same parameters for that. I love too, I just want to reiterate this, that you've said a couple of things that's music to my ears is, you know, as much as you guys as CMHC or Crown Corporation, you know, your government, you have mandates, you know, at the same time you understand that this has to be profitable or no one's going to do it. And that's the only way that this is going to actually work is if it is profitable for everybody involved. So you know, that's beautiful. And then also the last thing that you know kind of mentioned was like, we're not talking about, you know, the people that are living in encampments and maybe need more help than what we are able to give other than housing. You're talking about those, you know, everyday single moms, new people to Canada, those people that are our tenants anyways, but we can focus on them and focus on finding a way to give them what they really need. So I know that that's, you know, awesome stuff. That was music to my ears when we first started talking. So I was glad to hear it. So I wanted to reiterate that. So if you were to tell me, okay, so, you know, this is the biggest need is, you know, a certain sector of the population, how do you guys measure that? And I know you had a slide that kind of
so there's that one that says housing is the cornerstone, that one. So go a couple. Next one. Okay, so we have this diagram that you, like, if you've ever been to a CMHC presentation, you've probably seen somebody throw it up in some variety, but and it's, you know, it's not without its flaws because it kind of it alludes that there's a linear line, you know, that a starting point and a finish line, and that's not the case. You know, like healthy communities comprise all sorts of different kinds of housing, like all sorts of different, and we need that. And actually to have a healthy functioning you know, housing ecosystem, like to have all that. So when we're looking at this particular slide, you know, we have those individuals who are houseless, like they are chronically homeless. They perhaps are, you know, we're like, so some of our programs, absolutely, like we are mandated to obviously provide housing for those most vulnerable first, right? So that's where you've seen a lot of investment from CMHC, especially since the pandemic began, where through our rapid housing initiatives, through direct dollars, we've invested like billions of dollars in these sorts of really high need, high acuity situations. And so you'll have seen announcements in most major municipalities across the country to address these sorts of issues. And then we have, like, you know, as we move along kind of that line, and I hate to call it a line again, but, you know, we have that kind of you know, like shelters and transitional housing. Transitional housing can also include, though, women fleeing violence, right? Which I do believe that some of you might also be working with in trying to find that second stage housing for women coming out of maybe transitional and their children coming out of transitional housing. And then we have supportive housing, which could look everything from seniors housing to housing for people with disabilities. It could be, you know, yes, it absolutely could be supportive housing for individuals who are working through mental health or addiction challenges, things like that. But you know, it can also be seniors. So it's a broad definition, and so. But where I certainly see a lot of like private investors really playing in is the kind of next, like moving out of the community housing, but into that community affordability and market housing, and that's kind of the sector, the sweet spot that we see. And how you could play will vary depending on where you are in the country. Like, so if you were here in Alberta, I'd be giving you some scenarios. And I think in our next session, we're going to talk about that in even greater detail. But we have regional data all across the country where you can find out what core housing need is in your community. It's called our housing market portal. So if you just Googled CMHC housing market portal, it's full of data. And I believe
housing market portal. Okay.
Yeah, and I believe it was just mostly updated, I think, with the latest census data. So, or it's being currently done right now, being uploaded. And it's a really cool place to actually play around. You can type in your municipality or your region. In larger municipalities, you can actually type in the neighborhood, like the community, and you can see like what do rents cost, what's core housing need, and who's at risk here. And in many communities, we're actually looking at, we want to see those mixed kind of market and what we call mixed tenure sort of builds.
Okay, so let's talk about that. I'm going to bring back that slide just for a second. So for those of you guys that are watching, if you're looking at the very left hand side of the screen and it's homelessness, emergency shelters, transitional housing, I will be the first to admit that that's exactly what I think of when I thought of upholding and supporting affordable housing initiatives, and that scared me as an investor. But what Sandie's saying is no, there's community programs for that, there's government programs for that. Like, that's a totally different sector. What you guys and where we all fit in is perhaps in that supportive. I know a lot of you guys are into senior housing and that sort of thing, so that's supportive community housing, but then also going into community housing, affordable housing, and the normal housing market. So this is kind of referred to, Sandie, in your language, and the reason we're learning all of this language, guys, is because next week when we go into the programs, we need to know what all this stuff means. And so this is what you're calling mixed market, where some of your units are affordable and some of them are market rent, and those market rents are supporting the other less than market rent affordable ones, and it evens out because there's incentives that CMHC will give you to do that, which makes your costs lower.
And I want to say that this isn't just for private investors. Actually, most nonprofits are now starting to come up with mixed market sort of models to increase their financial viability, because they're realizing that 100% affordable, unless you have deep subsidies and you have lots and lots of government sponsorship beyond the federal government, because we don't provide what are called operational dollars. Outside of our Indigenous, First Nation, like on nation sort of stakeholder groups, we don't provide operational dollars. Provinces do, that falls under their mandates, and it will range from province to province how much money they will spend on operational dollars. And so in those prairie provinces, we are not seeing provincial investments in new projects. They're trying to back out of the ones that they are in, like they're trying to find ways out. So we know that we have to be financially viable. So sometimes it's that what we call that mixed market rentals. So as Tiffany was mentioning, you have, like you take a build, we'll just use 100 because it's a nice even amount. So a lot of our programs that you'll see identified next week, have a certain percentage that in order to qualify for some of our funding, we're going to say, we want to see 10% or 20% of the units at this kind of below market rate. And that'll vary based on the program. But then you can offset that program, by charging your market rents for the vast majority, like, 70, 80, 90% of your units, and allowing you to be able to provide those lower income sort of units that are the same as your other ones. Like, we're not saying like you should, keep your, those units you can't rent anywhere else. We're saying that there's value to renting to sometimes to individuals who are, in this sector. Like, when I think about people with disabilities, they often have like assured incomes. So they're your best tenants because they're not going to move.
That's true. They're very long-term tenants.
That's right. I shared this story with Tiffany of my own son who is coming up 25, and he's overhoused. Like, he's paying too much in rent right now with him and his two roommates, and he lives with a disability. But the thought of moving him keeps us paying too much rent.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, I know that I've had, people, same thing on Ish, and they're very, very good long-term tenants. So, and there's a sector of that, I have to stay away from myself just because I can't manage that, but there's certain sectors of that same thing, that disability housing, that I'm like all over. I'm like, I want to do this. This is something that I actually want to incorporate, but I didn't know that I could do it in a way that still made sense to my investors. But what you're saying is that we can. So, and that's a huge message, guys, that I want to get out today is is for me, for my mandate. We're looking to understand CMHC's mandate so we can understand the language and understand what's going on with their programs. But one message I really want for everyone to understand is that it is okay for us to still make money and still do this. This is okay by CMHC. We don't have to go into them with this, plan showing them that we're, bare minimum and, giving up our children's education for this because we want to be good humans. Because, I mean, guys, we want to be good humans, right? We do. But we also are smart business people.
That's not sustainable in the long term. It's not viable. So we want to, not only do we want to increase and add units to the market, we want those units to stay. So that's a big factor, is we don't want to be replacing them in 10 years because you've martyred yourself to the point where you can't afford to keep them up any longer. So we want to make sure that these are going to be viable for the long term. And especially if you're, signing up for, commitments around longevity for these affordability commitments and everything, it is possible, absolutely, to do good and make money at the same time. That whole concept of conscious capitalism and how do we, it just takes creativity. Sometimes it sees, we have a lot of our new construction, especially right now, that's really being super creative in having commercial retail maybe as a portion of that, because a lot of our programs will allow up to 30% to be commercial as well. Well, right. That you can charge full rents for, right? Like market rents for, and it can help offset maybe your affordable units. But again, it's looking at those the win-wins around the return of investment, and when it comes to things like less turnover, requiring painting and advertising and all those other move out kind of costs that come with that. You could as we talk about partnerships, like a lot of groups like yours might come up with like where they have lease agreements with organizations that maybe provide housing for people with disabilities or seniors or other groups like those second stage housing for women and children fleeing violence. And it's guaranteed income for you. So again, it's not something that you have to take great risk in that way. Yeah.
And I love that there's no expectation of that. So let's talk too about, so we've got, mixed markets, so that can mean a number of different things. Different programs will have different, percentages that you have to have. So you'll have to comply in all of that. So that's great. I loved, and you touched on it before, how you said, as CMHC and government agencies and everything else, you don't do operations. So what does that mean for us as investors, where we can fit in as a piece of that pie?
Well, I mean, when I say operations, I'm talking more about like that supportive housing or community housing, where there's support needed for some of your tenants, whether that be, what the community agencies do often, like when you think about some of those community agencies that provide tenancy support. So maybe it's a newcomer organization that helps people find homes, understand what they're signing up for contractually, to rent your your apartments or your units. And maybe it's, employment supports, things like that. We don't provide any dollars or any ongoing hands-on in those realms. Those are provincial, and those programs are usually funded through provincial programs and supports, maybe through health services, or sometimes it's through a community services ministry. It'll vary from province to province as to how it's structured. There are some natural supports that certainly, like if you have a building manager, you're probably already doing it. Like, I'm going to be real. Like,
seriously,
you're likely already doing it.
Ooh, sorry, I took the wrong person out. Hang on one second. There we go.
I was invisible. Now I'm in the show, but you're not in the show, it says. So, okay. But you're probably potentially already providing some of those natural supports. But again, nobody's asking you to be that person, right? Like, so if you're in a contract with one of those community agencies, they could be managing that particular block of tenancy that you're working with.
So I lost sound a little bit here, so I'm just going to turn mine up. I don't know if it's just me, if everybody, but yeah. So interesting that a lot of the questions are coming in right now that we're seeing is about, it's exactly what I've told you is the scary part for us is when we hear stuff like that. So Kathleen, let me just say that what I've learned from dealing with Sandie over the last few weeks and learning about some of the stuff that they are dealing with and wanting is that if that is a little bit too much for you to deal with people that are on AISH and you don't have, that's okay. That's not what their programs are about, which is what I thought they were about. So what they're about, that's one segment of it for sure. But there's so many other mandates that they have. So certain small minority population groups that need help. So again, like Sandie said, sometimes that's, women fleeing violence. Sometimes that's, immigrant populations. Sometimes that's just, racial groups as a whole, age groups, so many different things. So if having someone on AISH was hard on you at one point, then don't do that one. But there's so many other options for us out there as investors that I have never known about in 20 years of being in this realm in Canada, and I never knew about them. So if something's too much for you, Kathleen, don't worry about it. Just focus on something that isn't.
Absolutely. And I think that when it comes down to when we start looking at different programs and ideas, like one of the things I do love about the job that I have is that I get to kind of be that hopes and dreams, idealist. And I like having those kinds of conversations. But like, I think that, for sure, we are mandated from the federal government and the minister to obviously serve some segments of what we call priority populations first, right? And Tiffany has shared exactly what those are, those racialized groups, people with disabilities, seniors, women and children fleeing violence, like we have a Indigenous people, we have a certain obviously value, mandate, and priority in ensuring that those individuals are absolutely housed and achieving what they need to do. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of groups that might fit into some of those areas, as well as some of who your typical renters are, right? So, and it's going to vary from region to region. Like in Alberta, for example, we have, when we talk about different kinds of rent, we have like affordable, and then we have market, and then we have what we call near market. You'll hear near market as a term, right? And that's typically rents that are discounted like that 15% or something like that from the market. And in Alberta, we have a lot of empty stock in near market, but we have huge waiting lists for that affordable housing, that more discounted that we're talking about, right? And so what we're saying is, the near market stuff isn't working for us. You're just going to sit with empty units because the individuals that can afford market are going to potentially move on and move up. And the people that need those units they're going to sit on wait lists until affordable units come in. So if you're more concentrated, when you're thinking about your builds and your developments, then you could actually meet that segment right off the hop. So.
Right. Yeah. Now, so Colin asked an interesting question. So, and this kind of got me thinking is, he says, like, what about funding to make units accessible? So I will just kind of preface this by saying, I'll let you answer that question, but I wanted to kind of expand on the fact that what your mandate is as CMHC and where the money and the grants and the incentives and the rewards are all focused is in adding units. So like Colin and Nicole just moved from the GTA area over to New Brunswick. New Brunswick. And, so they know what it's like, the affordability crunch in Toronto area and the difference that it is when they move to a different site. They understand that whole thing. And, what you're looking to do is more add units to the market.
We have two priorities right now currently. Obviously, we want to add units. That's our primary focus, and where most of our work goes into is the adding of units so that those wait lists don't exist, right? But we also know that we need to sustain with existing units. We don't want to lose them. So we never want to see units that are lost to the sector because of either disrepair or they're not financially viable any longer, or those sorts of things. And so we have a significant amount of our mandate and budgets that go towards repairs and renewals and things like that. So that's a huge focus for us, is repairs and renewals, actually. And so Colin brings up a good point talking about accessibility, and you early on brought up another point around that green, or we'll use that for the sustainable word for here.
Yeah.
Sometimes people talk about sustainable as in literally like, we can sustain these units, but sometimes people talk about sustainability in terms of energy efficiencies. So,
Yes.
So when we think about the 3 priorities for CMHC, number 1 is affordability. Okay. Number 1 is affordability. Number 2, I will say, is climate. And this has been bolstered in the last year or so. Like, we have our very first chief climate officer. Our programs, you are going to see, are going to be increasing the investment, as well as the what it could look like for you, and trying to really promote those energy efficiency and reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's a big one. And then accessibility. Obviously, we can't have homes for people that they can't get around. So like most of our programs do have accessibility, not quotas, that's not the word, criterion built into them. They're usually pretty like they're not significant, to be honest. And some of our newer programs, it's a bonus if you put in the accessibility pieces. But certainly it opens to another market. So to be able to offset that,
Okay, so that's good information for us as investors, when we can look at it and say, okay, now when I'm planning out my portfolio, when I'm planning out, my next moves, and maybe it includes doing some of this and maybe it doesn't. But if it does, if part of your why in doing this is because you want some of that and you just feel like that's something you had to do later in your investing career, once you were established, once you had, we're saying, no, there's stuff you can do now. And so we touched on number 1, affordability. We've talked about that quite a bit. We've then talked about accessibility and, dealing with those populations. I didn't know and love the fact that you're saying you also don't want to lose those units.
No.
You want them to stay on. So there is programs for that. And then second for you, but third of what we're going to talk about here is what Jace is talking about, is about the sustainable, being green or climate. So things like free money to help investors integrating sustainable technologies like electric vehicle chargers, heat pumps, envelope retrofits. This kind of stuff you're saying is becoming more and more.
Oh, absolutely. Like last year they announced the Greener Homes Grant. And I mean, we still don't have all the particulars about that particular grant and how it's going to entail, but I do know that it will have multi-unit, like they launched the individual homeowner piece first, where you as a homeowner could apply for, it's not a program I talk about a lot, so pardon me if I don't have the particulars exactly right, but like where you could apply as a homeowner to get a interest-free loan, I believe, to explore energy efficiencies for your home. So whether it be maybe installing new windows or a roof or insulation or that sort of stuff. And now they're going to be rolling this out into multi-unit programs as well. Most of our programs also stack with other federal programs, which is really cool, or even provincial. So like thinking about energy efficiency and green in Manitoba, for example, they have Efficiency Manitoba has a bunch of funding that's available to help with things like that, building envelope and some energy efficiency repairs for multi-unit buildings as well. And they aligned with their eligibility criterion with a lot of ours. Same with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which is trickier for private investors to access, but it's not unheard of. Like there's ways to do it, especially if you're going to look at partnerships. But they completely align with ours as well. And I think you'll start to see more and more and more, because we want to be able to not just be standalone. Well, if where you have to choose either or. Like we want to be able to see that you can access all sorts of different kinds of programs. And in BC, they stack programs all the time.
And again, that's something that is new to me that I didn't realize. Like to me, it's like, well, do I want to do this one or do I want to do this one? And you're saying, well, you don't have to choose, do them all, and you'll get all of the incentives. And actual, what stunned me, and again, we're going to talk more about the programs themselves next week, but what surprised me was you're like, no, there's actual interest-free loans. No, and then
there could potentially be grants,
like free money if you're willing to do this kind of stuff. Well, why wouldn't we? And if all that does is make it so that our costs are lower so that we can offer more affordable housing, awesome. And why
we
wouldn't we
incentivize it? We're looking to incentivize it.
Yeah, and incentive. Yeah, it's amazing. So Dwight's asking about densification. So let's talk about that, because I know that's something also that we've talked about. Adding units or bedrooms to existing units in the city where homes are needed. What about that kind of stuff?
Well, that would probably fall under retrofits. So, repairs and renewals and retrofits typically go in there. It may fall under new construction, depending on where you are. I do know that in some regions, you're able to access what's called, like, one of our programs. It's a rental construction finance initiative. And I know that in Calgary, they just recently underwent an office tower conversion, actually, which was really cool. They had a ton of empty office buildings and towers, and actually it was a nonprofit that accessed it. But I do know that some for-profits were too, and they converted that to rental, to affordable rental. So it would potentially fall under those things. I mean, it's not a given where we would say, oh yeah, like here you need 4 units, but we do see conversions, quite a bit, and it likely would fall more under a new construction if the units are not already existing affordable, if that makes sense.
Right.
So if they're not already designated as affordable, we would be looking under our new construction and retrofits kind of thing. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So and there's lots of comments here. I'm not going to get probably to all of them, but you can see that there's a lot of interest in doing this kind of stuff. It's just for us, we've never had a way to find out about it and to contact. And so Brian Banks, I guess you're on. I don't see your name on here, but I think you're on. And he opened this up because he saw one of your presentations, and then he shared it into Fearless and said, "Hey, like, this is exciting stuff," and there was so much interest in it. And then the fact that we can actually, talk to you is huge. And next week, guys, she's going to point us more in the right direction as to what programs have what. We're going to talk in a minute about the different structures that, just different ideas on how to structure. But next week, where to find the programs, which ones qualify for what, that sort of thing, a little bit more direction that way. So incentives, I think Adele's talking about when they're stacked, are these incentives similar from one to another, or are they different incentives?
What you would do is you would fund different things under different programs. So it does require some coordination, to be able to say, okay, well, maybe I'll use this municipal funding program for the building condition assessment, or like energy audit or something like that, and then maybe I'll use this provincial program to do windows. And so we're not going to pay for the same things, like, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And but a lot of times they can be they can fall into one another in order to be able to do some of those repairs and renewals and retrofits. So it's kind of a neat way, and I think you'll see more and more consciousness directed around that. Like, we have agreements with different provinces. Like, we have what are called bilateral agreements to try to figure out how we work together and play together in these different fields. And I know, like, those of you that are in BC, like, really, really trying to keep an eye on what's happening there, because it's some really, really interesting work happening there about those partnerships. Like, we'll use CMHC for this piece, and the province is going to invest in this, and then they have foundations and other groups that are also investing. So, and creating these really interesting partnerships. And so, I think that's a nice segue into that. Like, most of our programs, and we're going to talk about the National Housing Strategy, because it just baffled me that you'd never heard of it. Like, next time, and so, I know that a lot of you are more familiar with our commercial programs and things like that. We'll touch on those, but that's not my wheelhouse typically, but we can touch on them somehow, somewhat anyway. But there are experts in that, typically your lenders and things like that. But when we talk about partnerships, there's a lot of ways for for you to get involved. Like you could be you yourselves could get into having, certain units out of your portfolio that you have designated and committed to being affordable, perhaps by accessing our programs or things like that. You're bound to it a little bit, but, just out of the value structure and your Be Good Humans kind of thing. And then there's other ways. There's partnerships you can enter into it. Like, remember way back, I talked about all that investment that we made as a federally, publicly, to the most vulnerable groups. Well, all of those, many of you are developers as well, builders, like you're builders. And so they all need builders.
Yeah. So get this. So can you tell me about that one builder? I can't remember. I won't.
The one I shared with you? Yeah.
I thought it was a different one than the one that you shared, but maybe it was.
Okay.
Just the
Well, we
fact
can
that
share a couple examples, but like, yeah, you've seen hotel conversions. They're happening, right? Like you need a builder to help with that sort of thing. And those are 100% financed by the government. It's just win-win business there, right? Like that's what we're looking for some of you.
So,
and you can.
So what you're saying in a hotel is that it's a hotel at one point, and now it's being converted to be affordable housing. Yeah. And so like Dwight, for example, that was something that he was, asking about just last week. And, so there's actually programs to help you through this so that you can actually be, creating a win out of it. So actually this too, I thought was really interesting what Jason's saying. He says, it improves your NOI, which is good for investors. It's similar to ROI, allowing some units to be affordable while others are maintained at the market rate. The overlap between green and affordability is noteworthy. So, it's true. Like if you can be creating this and mesh these together, then there's even more programs, more incentives for all of that. So
absolutely, because between the repairs and renewals, there's already significant investment and already we've already invested both, efficiencies and everything in the sector. We don't want to lose those. And then also we know that they're viable longer. They're more financially viable because if it costs less to run your building's envelope, you can charge less rents. Like really, honestly, or maybe subsidize the ones that you could, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that's really interesting.
Okay, can we talk about so there's three different ways that often these partnerships come together. And for us, we could come in all three. We could wear all three hats, guys. Some of us could wear two, and some of us could wear one. So what are those three areas that come together to create these partnerships?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, we got off track there. So the first one is the all three. Obviously, you could be most of you have management experience. So typically, like management experience, we want to know, you've been in the habit of collecting rents and you have that sort of experience. You have, builder and developer knowledge and all that sort of stuff. So you could potentially come in as all of it and be the builder, manager, and operator of a build, just like you are, that contains some affordable units. You could certainly come in some sort of partnership. Maybe it is just a direct, as we said, where you're just the builder. You're using that knowledge, or the manager, because oftentimes we find that some groups where they're lacking is they don't have management experience. So, I'm working with one group right now who is, it's really early days, but they are a nonprofit and they're new to the housing sector. And so they need to find someone. They have the right idea, they have municipal support, they have all that sort of stuff. And where they're lacking is being able to demonstrate that they can manage those units, to make sure that the bills get paid and the rent collected and that, the roof doesn't cave in and all that kind of piece. They just don't have that experience. So you could partner and be the manager for maybe a nonprofit.
And you know what I love about that part, Sandie? I just have to tell you the truth is, for me to navigate all these programs, to me that sounds like quite like a lot, but a nonprofit is used to that. That's what they're accessing and have access and even contacts for all kinds of programs on a regular basis. That's how a lot of them even function. So some of that kind of extra detail stuff is already taken care of by them. You can come in as a builder developer, or you can come in as a manager, so that helping with the operation part. And thirdly, how else can we come in, which is quite exciting too.
So the third one is you could go in as a partner, whether that be, with, the P3 model or any others. Like, you could come in right to the table. And so we're seeing this more and more and more. We're hearing about it. We're hearing about people wanting to make sure that they are, that they're at the table. And because you guys, if you're, so this would be like, maybe you're the builder developer, there's a nonprofit, and then there's government. So there's our three, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So you come in, and so we bring our partnership, or maybe there's a provincial investment, and then the nonprofit and the builder developer come together to do the operations and the construction and all that sort of piece. What's really cool is you structure that as a limited partnership, like, and there's parameters around that, right? Like, so that it's a new entity, and how you structure it will also help impact what percentage of maybe grants that you might be able to have accessible, because nonprofits and Indigenous groups, for example, have higher levels that they can access than the for-profit sector. And we'll see that in the next presentation. Yeah. But, so there is that kind of partnerships are key to a lot of our programs. We want to see that, because it, again, makes them more viable from a financial perspective and a longevity perspective. And so you can see that, like, there's a build here in Edmonton. I'll use this example because I know I was sharing it. And actually, I'm sharing it because they didn't even actually use our programs. So it's just kind of funny, but it's a really good example. Yeah. So what they did was, it was a nonprofit housing provider. So they manage housing on behalf of the province here. Okay. So they're a public sector nonprofit. Okay. And so what they did was they entered into a partnership with a large construction firm to do this kind of model. And what they did was, the nonprofits, because we always think nonprofits don't have any money, but a lot of times they have equity. Oh yeah. They have equity in the properties that they have either bought out if they were public sector, or ones they've developed on their own, that they've had long-term mortgages and they have equity. So they take the equity from that and they invest it into the new build. And they come in with the builder developer and they create this new set of units. And what you do is you end up having, so you subsidize, like, you have the affordable units that are being offset by the market units. And what you can do is, instead of, when people's income changes, because that happens, right? Like, if you're no longer in housing insecurity, you can take care of some of those other things in your life, right? Like, you have more discretionary income, you can spend more money in your community, you can, all those sorts of things. And so you don't have to move then, because you no longer qualify for your subsidized apartment. So again, you're not losing out on having to turn over that unit and having to, paint and do everything else. You just end up charging more. So it's rent geared to income, perhaps. So you can keep doing that. And then what they do is they're backfilling and replacing the units with more affordable. So they never lose them. In fact, they have commitments to add more as the equity gets paid down and the return of investment. They've decided, well, this is enough profit, so we're going to maintain this level of profit. And as our equity builds, we're just going to backfill with more affordable. So that's how they kind of are being a good human. I mean, you could take it out the other way around and just take more profitability each time, and that's fine too. Like, I think it's really arrogant of us to say you should invest in the sector and not expect to make any money. Yeah.
Well, even not, nonprofits or not for profit. I was amazed when I learned a few years back now that that didn't actually mean not for profit. It just meant that you reinvest the profit. And I'm like, oh, well, what the heck is the point of that? So, I mean, a lot of us, just fine to do it either way, as long as, there's reasons for doing so that make sense all around. So lots of good stuff. I love the fact that we can come in at any point. So we can come in as that builder partner. We can come in as, you can create a nonprofit, guys, or partner with a nonprofit that's already existing. who already has those initiatives and already has these things all rolling and just needs partners to do that, we can also come in just with capital. And if we're a capital partner, that alone too is a fantastic way to put our money to work as well. So yeah, like
there's always capital investments, that you could certainly look at as well too, right? Yeah,
just awesome. And so I know we're up our hour already here, but I just want to make sure everyone understands the beauty of some of these programs so it's all regional. Okay, so that's what Sandie has really helped me to understand, is that because there's some things that are at the federal level, there's other things that are at the provincial level, and other things at the municipal level. It depends on where you are, on what you can qualify for. So next week we're going to go through, we're going to look at some of these programs. But what I want you to also remember is that, if let's say in Vancouver, let's say in Toronto, we've, a lot of us have been priced out of those markets. We can't really be investing in there anymore, yet there's still opportunities. Plus, there's some of the areas that need it the most. There's some of the most unaffordable places in the world. So because of that, the beauty of some of these programs is that can actually open up some of those markets for us. So for those of you that are, in those areas, but you don't want to invest outside of your backyard, some of these programs actually might incentivize you, reward you, whatever, and make it possible for the numbers to actually work in those areas again, because that's where their focus is, and that's where they're focusing the incentives. So pretty cool that, although Alberta, for example, maybe isn't going to be as great a place for some of these programs and incentives, that's okay, because Alberta's great in other ways. But, some of the tougher areas are prime for these programs, and that just opens up so much more.
Yeah, I encourage you to have a look at that. As I said, it's called the Housing Market Portal. Like you can poke around our website and look for it, but it does. I Google the same way you do, because I find our website can be overwhelming if you just go in and start looking. So I always look for exactly what I type in: CMHC Housing Market Portal, and you can type in and you can see like, oh, maybe I want to look at this market and see what the core housing need is, and does this fit what I need? There's tons of like subsets of data that you can look at. So I think it's really, really interesting to play around if you're data and a number person, and to be able to do that. And I know like this was a conversation, and next time when we meet, it's probably going to be a little bit more of a presentation, and I apologize for that, but it's just a lot of info. So I want to make sure that I'm giving you like, slides, and I'll talk about them, and then we can figure that out as to how we can see if we can incentivize you to join us in our goals to ensure that all Canadians have a home that meets the needs and that they can afford, right? Like 2030 is coming.
2030 is coming, and that's a lot
8.5 years away.
Right? And if we can all have a little piece of it, that's great. I just wanted to address this to Shane. So you said, how do we book a call? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. So we're afraid of the influx of calls and info that might be needed. So next week is going to be a little bit more informative in the actual programs and kind of that detail stuff. This is more overall, let's understand. Next week is going to be that. And then Shane, we will address and see what we need to do. But we have a couple of ideas of how we're going to kind of funnel out everybody's interests. So just hang on to those questions. We'll get to them. But like look at this comment. This is the good humans. I feel like I'm in the absolute exact place that I'm supposed to be. Thank you. Aligns perfectly with my why and my soul.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, right? Like this is something we want to be doing. And I don't know Jace myself, but he seems very much into this social responsibility thing, and I love it. So anyways, thank you, Sandie. Guys, next week we're going to dive in more. Sorry?
No, I said thank you.
You have been just awesome to deal with over the last few weeks. It's so exciting.
It's really interesting, and I appreciate that you've granted me some of that ability to be able to say, I don't know. Like honestly, it's new for us. It's newer for us, and it has spurred a lot of conversation behind the scenes with my team. And as we try to figure out what this potentially could look like and how we can play in these fields more than just the one-offs, because there's always been one-offs, always. But how can we be more purposeful in this way? So
like,
I
guys,
think that,
they're trying to
yeah,
figure out how they can work with us. Can you believe it?
yeah.
Like, after all these years of us chasing CMHC, now they're saying, hey, how can we work with you? Yay. Like, we're so excited for it.
Mhm.
And especially when it has this good social component, and that you couldn't be in a better group of good humans. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see all these comments coming by.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, like everyone's just loving it. So we'll continue the conversation next week. Thank you so much, Sandie. And
Yeah.
next week we're gonna get a little nitty gritty, guys. So hold on to your shirts a little bit. It's gonna be more about the
I'm sure I'm
grant,
going to be taken to the mat next week, so we'll figure it out.
right? We're gonna be like, wow.
Go easy on
So
me.
the interest rates, the loans, the free money, the grants.
I'll try to bring a couple concrete examples too. So, okay.
Yeah, awesome.
Awesome.
Okay, guys, everyone have a good night. We will see you next week. And Igniters, we'll see you over in Laser. See y'all soon.
Bye.